Hello, Bill.
Hello, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everyone.
It's good to be back here. It's kind
Good
of.
to be back. Good to be back.
I feel kind of cramped on the outside. I need to be on the inside. Comfy chairs.
Welcome.
Good food. People don't know about the food in the DMZ. It's actually quite delectable.
And very nice coffee. Should add as well.
Good cafes. Nice music club.
Made by the Correct.
I noticed that you spent a lot of time, Matt, thinking about where the Republican Party should go ever since Obama won re-election, and
Before Obama won re-election.
yes, you saw it coming, and one major figure that I feel has been kind of on the same page as you. Is Bobby Jindal, and he famously said a few months ago, "We got to stop being the stupid party." But he wasn't offering, and you're the phrase you coined was modernization, not moderation, and Jindal seemed to be, I think, on that same line.
Well, it's funny you mention that because he actually used. I think he lifted my verbiage. He actually used that exact line in his CNN column, which is fine.
Right.
That's the reason. That's the reason I do this.
All politicians borrow. The politicians don't make their own ideas.
Right. And in fairness, I don't even know where I got the idea. It's possible that someone else originated, although I've yet to be able to find that. But it's not like, there are only. I think it was Tom Petty who said there's only so many notes. When it was the Red Hot Chili Peppers or somebody were accused of ripping off Last Dance with Mary Jane? Is that the name of the song? Anyway, there's only so many notes,
So Jindal writes this op-ed in Politico the other day, and there's a part about this that I think is sort of relevant to you. There's a part that's sort of relevant to those of us on the left. But let's start with the first part. So he leads by saying, "We've had it's titled GOP Needs Action, Not Navel Gazing." And starts by saying, "We've had enough. Yes, we just lost our second straight presidential election to Barack Obama. Yes, losing is painful and has consequences. Yes, when you lose, you make adjustments. Enough already. Let's get on with it. Yes, we have plenty of changes to make. I've offered a list of 7 ideas for change. Former Governor Jeb Bush has offered substantive thoughts, as have Senators Rubio, Johnson, Paul, and others. The points these gentlemen have made are sensible and merit serious discussion. And it should go without saying that we should continually challenge our own assumptions and evaluate our standing. But the excessive navel-gazing leads to paralysis. At present, it looks as if the entire Republican Party needs to go to counseling. It's really getting embarrassing, all these public professions of feelings of inadequacy. Every day it seems another jilted, high-placed Republican in Washington is confessing to the voters, it's not you, it's me." Then he goes on to say, "It's time to stop the bedwetting. Let's remember a few things. We have 30 governors who took control of the House. Our outgoing president was unpopular in 2008. So no more self-analysis. We've had a catharsis. Let's stop defeating ourselves and get on offense and go kick the other guys around." So is this a useful pep talk?
Let me just stop you there. Well, my first question would be, give me some examples where people were really doing all this introspection. I mean, I'm probably guilty of this, but I don't see examples of a lot of Republican politicians apologizing or doing any, reflection, really. I mean, so he sets up this premise that Republicans are sort of, just sort of obsessed with, self-flagellation, but who? Give me an example.
I mean, I think there's more. You still see the disagreement within the party on certain issues. I mean, he sort of makes this sense of okay, we've already made our adjustments. We've already had the discussion. We've already raised some ideas. We're in the process of challenging ourselves. That's sort of done. Now let's get back on the offense. And do you feel like that process is done? Have the adjustments been made and now everyone's sort of on the same page and ready to go?
No. I mean, first of all, a few things come to mind. Like, first of all, I think that he is right in the sense that it would be wrong to constantly be, dwelling on, pessimistic and dwelling on the problems and, being gloomy all the time. That's not a good thing. Having said that, I think that, people and parties should constantly be evaluating themselves and be taking, sort of weighing what's working and what's not working. And frankly, I haven't witnessed too much introspection, certainly not. But I suspect, as Recline implied in his piece on this, that this is really pandering to the base, that Jindal is telling people what they want to hear. And, the base, the Republican base, doesn't want to hear that they have to do any work. They don't want to hear that there's still work to do, that they have to, adapt conservative first principles to the 21st century. They want to hear that they're perfect, there's no more work to do. And I think Jindal's not giving them what they want to hear. Whereas before he was saying, take your medicine, now he's giving them bromides, essentially.
So, he was saying, let's stop being the stupid party, and now he's kind of saying, we're not being stupid anymore, so let's move forward. Do you feel, can you articulate, are there three things, give or take, that need to be fixed that are not fixed?
Well, look, I think that, obviously I'm a supporter of immigration reform. That's the obvious one that comes to mind. But I think that a lot of it, honestly, when I say modernize, not moderate, I don't think that conservative philosophy or principles really need to be changed. But I think that we need to change, adapt them to the 21st century. And so, for example, I think that Americans are getting more urban, America's obviously getting more ethnic, and I would argue in many ways more sophisticated. And so I think that conservatives need to find ways to apply, their principles to 21st century solutions to sound like Newt Gingrich. They're already doing that. Jindal has been great on championing school choice and, education reform. And I think he's totally on the right side of that. And if you've seen, the movie Waiting for Superman, there are a lot of kids who are stuck in struggling schools. I think that, conservatives and people, Republican governors like Chris Christie who stood up to the teachers' unions are, on the side of the angels on that issue. But I think, whether it's infrastructure, you name it, there are a lot of areas where conservatives need to, be sort of involved in finding solutions. And then I think it's also a matter of communicating those solutions to this changing 21st century America. And I think that has to do with the person doing the communicating and the rhetoric and the way that you do it. I really do believe that conservatism is a good philosophy, is a right philosophy, and is better for all Americans. But oftentimes you wouldn't know that if you listen to a Republican politician. So,
well, it seems like the fault line that I think you're getting at is, and this is sort of what the difference that Gingrich brought to the Republican Party in the 90s, an attitude that conservatism should be used to solve problems, to aggressively identify problems and try to solve them. Let's solve the education problem. Let's solve the immigration problem, as opposed to a conservatism that's about getting out of the way completely. It's not my business in government to find problems. We're here just to be a force of restraint and let other entities solve problems. And I feel that is kind of like a difference in mindset. Like school choice, for example, I feel like most conservatives are with you on school choice. I think there are a lot of conservatives that don't go out of their way to crusade on the subject and say it is imperative that we make education better, as opposed to it's imperative that we abolish the Department of Education and get the federal government out of our business.
Right. No, I agree, Bill, and I think that that conservatism certainly can do both. I mean, there certainly is a time when stopping bad government and stopping bad bills is a good day's work, and so I'm all for that. But I also think that if you just can't play defense all the time, or you'll always be losing. Even if you play defense all the time and you win half your games, you still lose a lot of territory over the years. And that's really where conservatism's been, constantly on defense, trying to conserve things that are good about America and standing athwart history yell and stop. And even if you win half your battles, you've lost. At the end of the day, you look back and you've lost all this territory. You've lost a lot of what is good about America. So I think you have to be proactive. And I think you have to, it's not enough to be against things. You have to be for things. School choice. I mean, let's look at like the issue of adoption. Would be a great issue for conservatives to rally around and try to be a part of. At the same time as being, defending the right to life. So I think these are, I would say, proactive conservatism. Some people think that would be an oxymoron, but as I think I've just described, I think you can make a good case that it's not only the right thing to do, but also it's the winning thing to do. I mean, there is a bias toward action. I think probably, if not in the human spirit, then at least in the American ethos. And you look at one of my political heroes, William Wilberforce, who led the charge to abolish the slave trade in Great Britain. I have a little bit within me. I believe that conservatism, just like America, ought to be a force for good in the world. And yes, that sometimes means stopping bad things from happening, but other times it means proactively pushing for good things to happen.
I mean, that seems to be the difference to. I mean, there's an old mindset of conservatism, not old. I think it's been around for a while. That it's just not our job to solve problems. The market works these things out, and there are winners and losers, and that's life, and that's just not. Let's get out of the habit of publicly worrying about problems. That's just not what we as a society should be doing. And I think that's, and you have your libertarian strains and your communitarian strains. Your communitarian strain is telling you there are community problems. Let's do something. Maybe it's not a big government way to solve it, but let's do something to solve it. It's important to come together and solve things in general. And I think that I imagine is something that still divides conservatism to this day.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's an ongoing schism, and certainly, I think interestingly, I would compare this to the way that someone like Justice Scalia, when he views originalism, what he means by that is, look at the founders' original intent, but clearly you have to adapt that to the 21st century. I mean, the founders didn't have DNA testing, but Scalia extrapolates that because of the Fourth Amendment, they would oppose, this suspicionless searches whereby someone is arrested and just by virtue of being arrested, not convicted, you can take a DNA swab. So my point here is that Scalia is an originalist. He doesn't believe in a quote-unquote living constitution, and yet he is applying the founders' intent to a changing world, as you have to do, because, again, DNA testing did not exist in the time of the founders. And I would argue that's sort of what conservatives have to do, is use that same model. Doesn't mean that you ought to run away from conservative philosophy or abandon first principles, but you have to find a way to adapt those principles to a changing world. And make no mistake, the world has changed since the founders. And so just looking back at the Constitution and saying, whatever they said, that's fine, but you have to find a way to make it relevant to 21st century Americans. And just saying that that's what they said isn't enough. You have to adapt it to the modern world.
Now, the other aspect of the Jindal column that I think the left is focusing on more is towards the end, he is expressing confidence that the pendulum swings, conservatism will have its day again. And he says, at some point, the American public is going to revolt against the nanny state and the leftward march of this president. I don't know when the tipping point will come, but I believe it will come soon. Why? And he has this big, massive list. Because the left wants the government to explode, to pay everyone, to hire everyone. They believe that money grows on trees. The earth is flat. I don't even know what he means by that. The industrial age, factory-style government is the cool new thing. Debts don't have to be repaid. People of faith are ignorant and uneducated. Unborn babies don't matter. Pornography is fine. Traditional marriage is discriminatory. 32-ounce sodas are evil. Red meat should be rationed. Rich people are evil unless they're from Hollywood or are liberal Democrats. The Israelis are unreasonable. Transnet must be stopped. It goes on and on and on. And on the left, folks thought that was perhaps going back to the stupid party, not having a very sophisticated, nuanced discussion of our ideological differences. But on the right, does that look like Jindal is, showing how it's done, showing how to pin liberals down on their weak points?
Well, as Dave Weigel wrote at Slate, I mean, it reads like a stump speech, and I suspect had he delivered those lines at a Republican rally, it would have gotten massive applause had he delivered it effectively. But he wrote it at Politico, and it does seem to undermine his past arguments about the stupid party. And he wrote it at Politico. Why Politico? That's a little bit of a weird place to write this sort of thing. I guess first, let's be honest. I seriously doubt if Bobby Jindal wrote this column. I mean, I'm sure he signed off on it, but I seriously doubt if he actually wrote it himself. Having said that, that's almost irrelevant because if something goes out on your name, then you wrote it. So, look, I think the interesting thing here is that you have these juice boxers who weighed in heavily on it. Now, Matthew Iglesias, also at Slate, got dinged a little bit because he said something like, why does everybody assume that Bobby Jindal is smart? Is it just the ethnic stereotyping? Well, he tweeted that out. It turns out Bobby Jindal, actually, if you didn't know, has arguably the most impressive resume of anybody in politics.
But have we seen his college transcripts, Matt? I mean, how do you really know he's that smart?
Well, I think he has a very distinguished academic and professional resume. Let's just leave it there. Having said that, I think that you have a little bit of snobbery in the sense that you have people like these boy banders who they see Jindal doing this, and it's transparently pandering to the base. And they resent it because they say, well, this is a smart guy. Why is he doing this? He's not keeping it real, basically, which is the worst thing you can do. And this is sort of like, to me, it doesn't work because it's inauthentic. Jindal is trying to be something he's not. He's trying to pander to the base rather than be the guy that he really is. And it looks perfunctory, I think.
And this is where he got into problems with the State of the Union address, where he's trying to sound kind of cornpone, and tossing out, the dubious factoids about volcano monitoring and stuff like that, and it doesn't fit the image of the policy wonk wonder kid.
Right, and as I've said before about Dr. Ben Carson, I mean, we don't need more talk show hosts. What we need are more Indian American Rhodes Scholar congressmen, governors who can advocate conservatism, or more African American Johns Hopkins, physicians who can advocate conservatism eloquently and intellectually. And so, why not? Why doesn't Jindal stick to being the smart guy? Well, I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't play to the base, and this does. This sort of rhetoric does, and it makes me think. This doesn't just work in politics, it works in cable nets too. If you want to get on TV a lot, you have to sort of throw out this red meat. And I'll use the music analogy that I've been thinking of. Because I've been listening to Lucinda Williams lately, and obviously a really good kind of like alternative country singer. And it's really good music, but you never hear it on the radio. But what do you hear? You hear Carrie Underwood on the radio. And like Lucinda Williams is clearly a better, more interesting, more nuanced artist. But Carrie Underwood probably makes 100 times more money and is known by a lot more people. So you have this sort of dilemma. Now, if you're a music aficionado, if you're a music snob, you like Lucinda Williams better. And if Lucinda Williams started selling out and trying to get on commercial radio, you would find that like utterly repulsive. And I suspect that that's the reason that, you know, the Ezra Kleins and the Dave Weigels and the Matt Iglesias of the world found this repellent, because it's someone that they believe ought to be making, if they're going to make the conservative case, and of course these folks, let's concede, are on the left, but that they could respect it if he were making it in a more intelligent way, but they see it as like selling out. And that is the worst sin that one can commit in this world.
Well, I slightly disagree with you in that I feel like Lucinda Williams is a great example of highbrow country, and Carrie Underwood's a great example of middlebrow country. But I wouldn't call Carrie Underwood lowbrow. And I think what Jindal's doing
here... ironically, Lucinda Williams is both highbrow and lowbrow.
Well, I mean...
And Carrie Underwood's bourgeois.
Well, that's an excellent point, because on the presidential level, or musically on the mass market level, you have to marry some of these concepts to kind of go beyond a base, to go beyond a niche market and go big. And if you want to have a sustainable career, you might get a one-hit wonder that's middlebrow, but if you want to sustain, it's probably best if you can incorporate some highbrow elements into what you're doing, so you can continue to keep up with the times and stay a step ahead. And what Jindal and how one creatively intermingles that sort of thing is always, the secret sauce that those of us who are not great have a hard time with. Barack Obama.
Well, you are great, but let me say, I think Barack Obama is a good example of someone who did pull this off. I mean, he was palatable and acceptable and mainstream, and yet also had a little bit of an edge, a little bit of, he really did pull off this maneuver well. But it's a tough thing to do.
And Jindal right now, I think, is kind of lurching from the highbrow to the lowbrow. And it's not gelling.
No, it's not. It's just not him. He should just stick to, let Jindal be Jindal. And look, maybe that means he's never president. Fine. But the guy could still make a huge difference, and I would argue he has made a difference, especially on the school choice issue in Louisiana. But, anyway, so I think this was an interesting issue on a variety of levels. I mean, on one level, I think the reason that okay, I'll use the term yet again. I hope they don't think it's derisive. I hope they take it in the spirits it's intended. Homage. There's a reason why the boy banders were especially put off by this, or turned off by this. But additionally, I think that it does say something about the conservative base that essentially wants to hear. They want to have their ideas reinforced. They don't want to be challenged or even led. They want to have their ideas reinforced. And I would argue that when they have, an Ivy League educated Hispanic making the case against immigration reform, or an African American colonel, or an Indian American Rhodes Scholar reinforcing what they already believe, it creates a permission structure, and the permission is to do nothing, to change nothing. You have my permission to just, I'm telling Bobby Jindal, just be yourself. Bobby Jindal's saying to the base, you be you. You just be you. You're perfect. You're perfect. Don't, no need to change anything. You just be you. Just act like yourself, Be yourself.
Well, now...
And sometimes we need to be challenged to adapt.
Well, an issue you raised in this discussion before is immigration. Immigration is an issue that is sort of forcing the Republican Party to challenge itself. It's being put in front of them. At the end of the day, people in Congress are going to have to cast a vote. The party is going to be seen as having taken one side or another, even though there's a split in the party now. A couple of aspects of the trajectory of the story interest me. One is that I feel like it's high drama in Congress. What's going to happen here? No one knows the outcome. And there's a fair amount of coverage about it. And I feel like, I don't feel like it's being poorly covered. A lot of angles are being covered in the press, but at the same time, it's all very page 5. All the blow-by-blow stuff. It's not dominating the headlines the way that the IRS was doing for a bit. Now NSA stuff is. The media can't figure out how to rivet the country behind the legislative machinations, even though they're quite interesting. Just in the past few days, you had Lindsey Graham, very conservative Republican, but pro-immigration reform, taking a pretty big swipe at his fellow pro-immigration reform conservative Marco Rubio, because Rubio's out there trying to walk the line and try to, nudge conservatives along into being accepting of this by saying we're not ramming it down your throats, we're incorporating your concerns. You don't think we're there on border security yet? Okay, we'll toughen it up for you. And he goes out and says, if I had to vote on the current bill today, I'd vote no, even though he's one of the drafters of the bill. But he's saying he's saying I wouldn't vote for it because it wouldn't pass the House, and therefore, what's the point? Let's toughen it up and try to get more conservative votes for it. Lindsey Graham goes to the Huffington Post and says, "Who says
the Huffington Post?" By the way, let me just interject. The Huffington Post, who has a contributor who I don't know if you saw this, Bill. Wrote a piece slamming me for being a populist opponent of immigration reform.
I did see that.
Did you see that?
I did see that.
No, he confused me with Mickey Kaus, a Democrat. So,
that is an example
anyway,
of
the fact that Lindsey Graham would go there.
Pace of news not having people to stop and read closely. CNN's Obamacare mistake has not totally been internalized throughout all of the new media.
But the fact that Lindsey Graham would go there to bash a Republican
right.
is not wise. And look, Lindsey Graham, he can do it his way. And guess what? They tried that in 2007 when McCain, Kennedy or whatever, and it failed. So the only chance they have is Rubio, and So.
Well, yeah, and I feel like I'm usually of the opinion, and sometimes wrong in this opinion, that behind the scenes, people know what they're doing. That things are done deliberately with an understanding. And so when I see Rubio kind of go out on a limb like that, I say to myself, well, everyone knows what he's doing. He's doing a little kabuki dance. He's trying to show that he's not all in, that he's still listening. He's still willing to tweak and make it to people's likings. And so maybe he'll say something a little bit provocative from time to time to give credibility to the notion that he's not ramming this down people's throat. And it's all a little bit of a...
And maybe he will. I mean, and I would also say, maybe he is doing some maneuvering to make the bill a little bit better.
Right.
I mean...
Well, I think there is obviously maneuvering going on.
To actually force them to toughen up the border control a little bit.
And so for Graham to make that comment then sort of undercuts my normal sense of things, that perhaps this isn't done with a wink, that Rubio's freelancing a bit, and Graham didn't like the way he freelanced. I think this is all tactical. I don't think they disagree in the broader strategy of what they're trying to accomplish. But clearly unnerved Graham that Rubio was sort of taking this tactical posture a little bit too far. Now, maybe it's a double wink. Maybe this is a way to further give Rubio the cred that he's trying to establish. It's hard. Maybe we'll get to read their diaries one of these days. I'm actually total digression. Well, semi-digression. I just finished Dutch. I finished Edmund Morris' biography on Reagan, and I've now found the most recent biography of Taft, which there are very few biographies about, even though I think it's sort of part of a very consequential time in American history. And one of the things that in the preface that the author mentioned was people, haven't done a lot of serious scholarship on Taft and haven't read the papers of the various congresspeople at the time, which gives you a different sense of perspective on what the conversation inside Washington was like. And that's sort of a critical piece of sort of understanding what really happened. One hopes that when the Obama biographies are written 20 years from now, they'll read the Rubio papers, and they'll read the Graham papers, and they'll read the Boehner papers, and the people that clearly had parts to play in Obama's agenda, but researchers might not think to look at. I would imagine the internal papers, the diary entries, the emails between the Gang of Eight folks are going to be rich in information as we look to how immigration reform did or did not get passed. So it's hard to know exactly what's going down here, but a lot of games are being played. I say that in a sympathetic way, because games have to be played at the end of the day.
Right.
But
well, let me just ask you real quick, because I know this is a diversion, but you mentioned you just read the Edmund Morris Dutch book.
Yeah.
How do you feel about what's your take on Reagan? Having read that, how do you feel about Reagan? I'm doing it first. I kind of may want to write an article about this one of these days, and I want to now read the Lou Cannon volume on Reagan's presidency and kind of match them up, because Morris took a very different angle. I mean, he really wasn't trying to write the blow by blow account of the presidency. So you don't get into the weeds all that much about how did tax reform really get done. What's all the angles of Iran-Contra? He gets into it because he doesn't, but he often kind of gives you a broad brush. Then in the notes, he kind of shows you where the deeper sources are. And if, I think the book got trashed at the time by the Reagan Inner Circle, and I feel like you know a lot more about that dynamic than I do. But my understanding was that they were quickly kind of revolted by it. It aired a lot of dirty laundry. It wasn't a glistening, gleaming, hagiographic portrayal of Reagan. A lot of warts, and the fact that Morris used this unusual device, inserting himself as a semi-fictional first-person narrator, where he is alive and tracking Reagan's life from his days as a youth, when Morris obviously wasn't alive and Reagan was alive, gave the Inner Circle sort of the opening to say, you can't trust this book. You can't tell what's true and what's not true. And right.
And I think Morris was demanding a degree of sophistication from the reader, and you can piece out what is true and not true. I mean, there's nothing not true about Reagan himself. What's not true is Morris, and there are a few characters that Morris creates in the periphery of Reagan's life. Putting aside that bizarre literary device.
Yeah. And I know, you still have to read the Lou Cannon book, and you're going to write a column on it. But as of now, I mean, as a liberal, but having read a book that most conservatives haven't read, where do you? I mean, obviously it's nuanced, but do you find Reagan a likable, compelling figure, or do you see him as a force for darkness in the world?
Well, I mean, the Morris book is very nuanced on that point. I mean, it goes to great lengths to knock down a lot of liberal stereotypes of Reagan, even as it is confirming some of them. But it's really trying to kind of put all the pieces together, and in aspects where I think are relevant to today. It goes into great detail on the Bitburg controversy. Reagan would go into this trip to Germany, and he visits a cemetery where there are Nazi soldiers buried. And his initial itinerary did not have a stop at a Holocaust campsite. And this became a huge distraction. He had promised Cole that he would do it, and he felt that then they discovered that there were some Nazis buried there. Correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, but he felt it would be
a sign of disrespect to the current leader and weaken the current leader if he pulled out.
Well, even more than that. I mean, this is sort of like a throwback example of the days before crisis management, and it kind of speaks to what Reagan has sort of rigidity and a disinterest in critical constructive criticism and revisiting of premises and facts that he held, even if the facts were incorrect. But it's
I'm sure Deaver saw this as a public relations nightmare, right?
Well, I mean, eventually they did, but in the run up, they were totally blindsided by it. They didn't think it got kind of played out at the time. Sort of Reagan was somehow a sympathetic to the Nazis, which is ridiculous. I mean, that's clearly not what was going on. And I'm sure if I was an adult liberal at the time, I'd be piling on everybody else. But in the distance of history, you look back and say that's silly. That's clearly not. He's not an anti-Semite. He's not. So he wasn't a Nazi sympathizer in World War II.
Like when Truman went to Pendergast's funeral, and he was advised not to do it because it would be tied to machine politics.
Right.
And he did it anyway, and Reagan had made this commitment to the leader, that he would go there, and decided to go to sort of honor that commitment and take the hit that would predictably come by doing it.
Well, in Reagan's case, this was not loyalty to a friend. There's two things. One, his advance team was sort of protective of Reagan and thought it would just too greatly upset him to go to a Holocaust site. This is a guy who liked to keep things sunny. and they just thought that it just wasn't necessary to put him emotionally through that. And they had no idea.
That's interesting.
What's that?
That's something I didn't know. So that's interesting.
Morris talks toward the aides, and the aide was like, "You don't know what that would do to him. We just can't do that." And they had no idea. They even perfunctorily asked, "Is there anybody in the cemetery that we should be worried about?" They were told no. So they didn't think that there was a problem going there. And then once it became a thing, Reagan got very stubborn and was like, "Look, this trip is I'm putting words in his mouth, to bury the hatchet." I'm not trying to relive the past here. I'm trying to forge ties with Germany. I was invited here, and that should be that. No one should no one should infer more into that visit than there should be, and I'm not going to back down off of this. And he got face to face humiliated by Elie Wiesel in the Roosevelt room. And that kind of criticism in Reagan's face was not typical. But Reagan was just sort of very stubborn about it, and eventually they tacked on a Holocaust site trip to balance it out and try to get past it. But you look back at that in retrospect, and that this became like a big scandal of the second term, and it's all about symbolism. It's not about substance. It's not about Reagan's foreign policy. It's not about what Reagan believes in his heart. It was all, and I think obviously the Holocaust, as far as Elie Wiesel, were obviously deeply sincere. I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize their
right.
approach to it.
But there is some substance. I think the criticism is all symbolic, but there is some substance to Reagan's decision, which is to say that we need to project strength and unity with our allies, and that to stand up against the Soviet Union, we need to stand together, and the sort of signaling in that regard.
Right. And in the Soviet front, that's interesting. I mean, the fact that you really get the sense that that Reagan really believed in Star Wars. He really believed in lasers from the sky, zapping nuclear weapons, and sort of to see in these summit meetings, to see Reagan and Gorbachev talk past each other on the subject. Where they both seem to have actually a sincere interest in neutralizing nuclear weaponry, and just can't get on the same page because of this basic personal mistrust is painful. And I think the liberal attitude at the time was, Reagan is so more to the military-industrial complex, and giving fat contracts to the Northrop Grumman's of the world prevented him from accepting this fair Soviet deal. And
you're talking in Reykjavik, the Reykjavik deal that Reagan walked away from.
Exactly. And I still look back at that and say, I still can't believe you walked away from this deal, Reagan. It seems sort of crazy that you were so attached to SDI. But you do get the sense of, he just really believed in SDI. It wasn't a scam to, pay off his military contractor friends. And it's sort of a hard thing to get your head wrapped around. But you read the entirety of the book, you get a sense of Reagan as someone who had his dreams, had his beliefs, had the facts as he knew them, and would not budge. And so it does humanize him in that respect, and make him less of an ogre character. But there's certainly aspects of the book that still are. There's a scene at the very end where Boris is sort of pressing him on why do you do anything with homelessness, and Reagan kind of falls back on a lot of lame tropes and not explain why he didn't take the problem more seriously. There aren't really many homeless out there. That kind of talk. So I'm not saying it makes me feel like that Reagan's lovable, but there are aspects of it that you feel like he's treated so much more two-dimensionally at the time by his opponents than was deserved. That I would imagine apply to the way left looked at Bush and the right looks at Obama.
Well, that's a good point, but let me say, I think that's why I'm hesitant with some of the overwrought criticism of Obama and the doomsday stuff, because I remember some of the exact stuff being said about Bill Clinton by the same people who today say, well, Bill Clinton was great, he was conservative. So by virtue of reading history, or in my case, living history, just being old enough to remember the last time around, you become a little more skeptical to some of this stuff. And I suspect that looking back, George W. Bush is already gaining some popularity in the polls, and I suspect he'll be remembered more kindly by history, as probably will many of our presidents, Harry Truman most famously. Time for a quick plug, though, Bill. This is just a great time to be self-indulgent and promote my podcast, because I recently had Carl Cannon on my podcast, The Matt Lewis Show.
Now, is he the son?
Briefly,
he
is the son of Lou Cannon, and he's a great journalist in his own right. He's the Washington editor of Real Clear Politics, my former boss and editor at Politics Daily. He was on my podcast, The Matt Lewis Show. We did briefly talk about Reagan and Lou Cannon. And Bill Scher was recently on my podcast, too. So listen to that as well, and you can find it on iTunes. So if you don't already listen to the podcast, go and listen to Carl Cannon and the Bill Scher.
Well, should we end on that note?
That's a good note to end on, I think. A good self-promotion. So.
Always good to talk to you in the comfy confines of the DMZ.
You got it.